Welcome, dear friends, to Cardiac Radio and the Spiritist Society of Virginia in this study. It's an inner journey with Paul and Stephen. Yeah, it's the book Psychographed by Chico Xavier by the Spirit Emmanuel. We have already discussed about the preface of the book, a book that came in 1941. In the middle of a war, Chico Xavier was focused on seeking the good and sharing the good and molding the good with all the resources he had at hand. A great example and inspiration to us. Then, chapter 1 and 2, when we meet the Jewish family, Shoh Shave's family, with his children, Abigil, 18 years old, and Jeziel, 25. And after tragic events, Jeziel is sent to slavery forever. Chapter 3, we find Jeziel being saved by Christians at the time. They were not called Christians yet. They were men and women of the way, Jesus' way. In Jerusalem, Jeziel meets Peter. He becomes a follower of the Christ and a wonderful medium. Now in chapter 4 today, we are meeting Saul of Tarsus. And it begins with a beautiful description of old Jerusalem in the year 35 after Christ, exactly. We meet Saul in a very fortunate situation, materially speaking. He has all the material resources possible for the people at the time. It's as if today he had a Maserati, lived in a very wealthy location, and he is from the prestigious elite society of the Jewish communities, the Pharisees. He's a Pharisee. His friend Zadok comes to visit him and talks to him about these people who are claiming that Jesus is better than Moses. And he's like, we must see it. But we see in this chapter two sides of Saul, a very rough and tough one, and another one very soft. One in which he's very proud of himself, very proud of his affiliations. And we see the other side. He's in love with no other but Abigil. Can you believe it? He met Abigil, Jeziel's sister. As she started living, she was adopted by a couple. The man, Zacharias, knew Saul of Tarsus. They were introduced and they now are engaged. He wants to get married to her. The dialogue between them is very uplifting. We see this other side. He is extremely cheerful when he sees his friend. He's very focused at work, but he is very sincere in his love. Unlike the youth of his time, he preserved himself for true love and marriage. Abigil is the person who fulfills his dreams, he says. They exchange promises to one another. And he says that in 2 days he's coming back because he wants to introduce her to his sister, Saul's sister, and in 6 months they shall be married. This chapter 4 teaches us mostly about how Saul of Tarsus is driven by his faith. Even the conversation with Abigil, says Emmanuel, all their most intimate discussions made God the sacred participant in the hopes of the future promised to them, sanctifying in unending joy. And it's so beautiful when we hear Abigail and Saul exchanging their plans. They have something very strong in common. Both were raised by their parents to put God center stage in their lives. So we could say that in the first chapters of the book, Paul and Stephen, we find that parenting is essential for a successful life. Being that the direction of their lives, they say that their home shall be a temple, love for God shall be their strongest pillar, and they make promises to one another in that regard. As we close this chapter, we know that that side of Saul is totally in with Abigail, but the other side, which we would say the masculine side of Saul, is still very brutal, intolerant, egotistic, narcissistic. Even in the dialogue with Abigail, when she talks about Jezeel, she says, "Can you please help me find my brother before we get married?" And he gets jealous. He's like, "Do you love your brother more than me?" You see how his ego is so strong. And that's exactly what's going to make him detour in life. We're going to talk about it very soon. You know, what makes us detour in life? Our imperfections, our weaknesses, our challenging aspects. And those are the ones we need to know and address as fast as possible. And I'm saying this because in chapter 5, we're going to see Saul and his friend Sadok entering the church of Jerusalem, the church of the followers of the Christ. And they notice that everything's so simple, so humble. And this is a parenthesis for us. Built at the cost of so much sacrifice. The simple structure was no more than a large shed with a tile roof and fragile walls, lacking any and all comfort. Who is there? James, Peter, John, the Galileans. And this is true for us spiritists nowadays. It's so important to enter spiritist centers and find simplicity. We are not supposed to create big structures. And I know people who think that we'll be successful when we have a large spiritist center with tens of thousands of people, like a mega spiritist center. This is opposite to what the first Christians have experienced. And did you know? I'll share this with you. Did you know that Chico Xavier, yes, I've heard this account from several people who had their strong friendship with Chico Xavier, including Dr. Marlene Nobre. I remember in 2011, when I was traveling to England for the medical spiritist meeting, and at dinner time, I sat down and asked her, why were Chico Xavier centers, three of them? He founded three of them. One in Pedro Leopoldo, two in the city of Uberaba, Minas Gerais. And why? Why did the centers stay so small physically? Thousands of people would come to the center. Why didn't they enlarge it? They remodeled it. And she said, actually, they tried. In the second Spiritist Center, Comunhão Espírita de Uberaba, in that center, once there was a large donation by a woman who had a farm. The directors of the center wanted to use the money to open more space in the Spiritist Center. Look at our pictures of the time, at Chico Xavier's time in the Spiritist magazine. We have 65 issues there available, or in the app. You go to the website or the app, spiritistmagazine.com.org, and there we're going to find thousands of people lining up to see him. But at that meeting with the board of directors, Emmanuel said no, and Chico said no, we're not going to do it. And he tapped his hand on the table and said, enough. You want to do this? I'll give you half of it. So he sold the farm, got a lawyer, sold the farm. The woman gave it to Chico Xavier. He never kept anything for himself. He sold it, gave half of it to the Spiritist Center in Uberaba. The other half, he gave it to a Catholic organization. And he left the Spiritist Center to create the third Spiritist Center, which is Spiritist Center of Prayer. Yeah. We need to keep things simple and humble, clean, organized. Because, as Chico Xavier used to say, when the center grows too much, love goes out of the window. So we need to multiply, create more centers instead of making one bigger. In the case of the House of the Way in Jerusalem, it was small but compacted with poor and miserable people. Remember, at the time, there were no hospitals, there were no nursing homes, there was nothing, daycares, etc. So they had to do it all. So you know the conclusion. It took Christianity to raise our world to the awareness of making hospitals, creating daycares, creating schools, exactly, historically. And the famous doctor of the law, Saul of Tarsus, when he saw that scenario, he was puzzled. He was scratching his head, saying, how can these miserable poor people be in any way means a threat to the law of Israel? Can't be. Until everybody saw Stephen coming up. Stephen was coming up. You remember, Jeziel changed his name to Stephen. Saul of Tarsus is dating Stephen's sister, and they don't know about it. She's seeking her her brother, asking Saul to help, and now he's in front of him, but he doesn't recognize. He doesn't know. So people are elbowing one another, saying, Stephen is here, it's Stephen, Stephen. He's very popular. He's a healing medium, a wonderful preacher. But he's thin, pale, has much love in his heart. He prayed in a loud voice and opened a passage in Matthew's notes. But instead, go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven has come. Stephen was not disturbed by the presence of the Pharisees, by the presence of Saul, and he was culturally adapted. If you see the whole discourse, the way he speaks with conviction, with tenacity, teaching us that we need to be strong in our convictions, that we need to stand up for what we know, not what we believe, because it's not a belief, it's knowledge. Spiritism is not a belief, it's reason, faith, knowledge. And he's talking about all of it with such conviction, and at some point, he stopped, allowed people to think. The other apostles, John, James, were in awe, had tears in their eyes to see the greatness of that preaching. Saul of Tarsus found himself captivated by it, but at some point, although he was highly surprised, he realized the danger of this new doctrine. He would change Judaism. He couldn't give in. And he says, pious Galileans, where's the sense in this strange and absurd doctrine? How dare you proclaim the false supremacy of an obscure Nazarene over Moses right here in Jerusalem itself, where the destiny of the invincible tribes of Israel is being decided? Who was this Christ? This Christ, was he not a simple carpenter? You think Stephen was quiet? No. He says, indifferent to the feelings of the fear in the group, it is fortunate that the Messiah was a carpenter, for humankind will no longer be without shelter. In fact, he was the shelter of peace and hope. Never again will we wander aimlessly in the storms or in the wake of chimerical ideas of so many who lived by calculation without the clarity of sentiment. Well, Saul and Stephen keep on dialoguing. The dialogue is long, and at some point, Stephen stops and says, I will not argue. And Saul was angry and said, why not? You are ordered to continue. See the arrogance in Saul. He is in the house of the way and he's demanding. And I see people who do that in spiritist centers. You don't pay anything, you find everything ready, and you think you can go in and out and do whatever you like. Mm-mm-mm. Stephen says, friend, Christ advised us that we are to give Caesar what is Caesar's and God what is God's. If you have any legal accusation against me, do not be afraid to expose it, and I will obey you. However, if it pertains to God, only God can reproach me. So the dialogue goes on, and Saul is super angry. And he says, I will talk to the Sanhedrin so you can clarify. I shall appeal, he says, to the Sanhedrin to judge and punish you. The Sanhedrin has the authority to put an end to your condemnable hallucinations. And how does Stephen reply? In a serene spirit, much like Jesus, Stephen says, friend, The Sanhedrin has 1,000 ways to make me weep, but I do not recognize its power to force me to renounce my love for Jesus Christ. Well, at the end of it all, with his impulsive temperament, Saul is enraged. He would have torn Stephen's hands to pieces. He tells his friends, "Let's go, the followers of the way shall pay very dearly for their defiance." They leave. Think about this. Saul had the opportunity to win in life a big lottery. On that day, if he were humble, he would have listened to that, talked more at length with Stephen, read the scriptures before he judged, and potentially even get to know that Stephen is Abigil's brother, and get to know that the descriptions of the Messiah matches with the scriptures that he is used to reading in Isaiah. But his pride blinds him, and he doesn't see happiness right before him. Do you think Saul of Tarsus was born to be mean, cruel, and a murderer of the followers of the Christ? No. Nobody has those lines in their reincarnatory plan. So today, as we close this chapter, to begin chapter 6 next week, we want to bring it close to our hearts and ask, when pride and ego are blinding us from seeing the good that is given before us, what do you think? Sometimes in our marriage, we have the very person that God assigned to make us improve ourselves, but we reject it out of pride. Or the country we live in, or even the body we have, or the child we have, or the job we have. And we become impulsive and angry, destroying true opportunities of redemption. As we close today our session, we want to think where in us we are intolerant, where in us we are impulsive, angry, and entitled, and how we can shift it by seeking the blessings in our lives and changing forever the scenario of a multi-millennial condition. Let's meditate and reflect on this as we raise our thoughts to God in gratitude for this book that brings a mirror image of ourselves and an opportunity for us to turn it all around and make life better. Should you have any questions or comments, feel free to write to us at kardecradio@gmail.com. For now, we thank you and we look forward to seeing you in 1 week as we enter new chapters 6 and 7 of the book Paul and Stephen. Thank you, friends.